You have been praying for the same thing for longer than you want to admit. Not a small thing. The thing. The one you have circled back to in every quiet moment, every fast, every Sunday where you sat in the third row and meant every word. You have done the work. You have shown up consistently. You tithe when it is uncomfortable. You serve when you are exhausted. You forgive people who do not deserve it. And you do it again when they do it again, because that is what the book says, and you believe the book. And somewhere along the way, without ever planning to, you started tracking. Tracking who receives and who does not. Tracking the testimonies at the front of the room. Tracking the people who seem to carry less consistency than you, less sacrifice than you, less obvious desperation than you, and who walk out of services with the exact answer to the exact request you have been lifting for years. You have never said this out loud. Saying it out loud would make it sound like jealousy, and you refuse to let it be jealousy, because you know better than that, and you love these people, and you genuinely rejoice with them mostly. But tonight, alone, the thought surfaces again, quiet and persistent. Why not me? The answer is not what you expect. The answer is not your faith. It is not your consistency. It is not your worthiness. It is something you do that feels so natural, so normal, so completely unremarkable to you that it has never once crossed your mind to call it a problem. But God has been trying to tell you for a long time, and every person he removed from your life without giving you a reason was part of that conversation. The first time someone was taken from your life without warning, you grieved it the way you were supposed to. You prayed for them. You checked in. You tried to understand. When it became clear that the relationship was simply over, that the person had moved on without a reason you could hold in your hands, you did what you were trained to do. You forgave, you released, you moved forward. You even made it into a testimony eventually. But you also, quietly, filed it under loss. You named it hurt. You assigned the story a villain and a wound and a lesson about trust. And you carried those three things forward into every room you entered after. What you did not do was ask why God allowed it. Not really. Not with the actual expectation of an answer. You asked the way you ask when you already believe you know. You asked rhetorically, with grief as the frame, and you received grief as the answer, which confirmed the frame, which is how closed loops work. And God let you. He did not force you to look at what you were doing with the loss. He just waited. And while he waited, he removed someone else. There is a specific pattern to the people God removes without giving reasons. You may not have noticed it yet because you have been looking at the wrong variable. You have been examining them, their behavior, their character, what they said in the last conversation, whether they deserve the investment you made. You have been conducting a detailed audit of the removed person as if the removal were a judgment on them, as if God looked at them, assessed them, and decided they had failed some standard you were not shown. It is almost never about them at all. The people God removes without explanation are almost always removed because of what they were activating in you, not what they were doing to you, what you were doing in response to them. The version of yourself you became in their presence. The ceiling that quietly descended over your faith when they were in the room. The way your prayers changed shape around them, not lower in volume, lower in expectation. The two of you had built a theology between you that felt like friendship but functioned like a lid. Think about who was removed. Not the obvious ones, the people who hurt you clearly, the ones even secular wisdom would have called toxic. Think about the ones that confused you, the ones you liked, the ones you respected, the ones whose removal felt genuinely unfair because there was no fight, no betrayal, no clean and usable reason. The ones you still miss. Think about who you were when you were with them. Think about the conversations you had. Not the surface conversations, the ones about life and plans and what you're both believing for. Think about the ones underneath. The ones where you both agreed, in the careful, spiritual-sounding language of mature Christians, that certain things were unlikely. That certain doors were probably not for you. That God had perhaps different plans than the ones you were originally hoping for, that maybe the version you had been believing for was too specific, too large, too much. You said it gently. They agreed gently. And both of you called it wisdom. You nodded at each other and felt the mutual comfort of people who have survived disappointment and emerged more realistic. It was not wisdom. It was agreement with limitation, dressed in the vocabulary of surrender. And God watched it happen. Here's the thing about that kind of agreement. It does not feel like doubt. That is what makes it so effective. It feels like the mature version of faith, the one that has moved past naive expectation and settled into a grounded, reasonable theology that holds God's sovereignty as a synonym for God's sealing. This is one of the most sophisticated traps in the life of a serious believer because it is constructed entirely out of true things. God is sovereign. His ways are not your ways. Not every prayer resolves the way you expect. Timing belongs to Him. All of that is true. But somewhere in the accumulation of those true things, A conclusion got added that was never in the original text, and therefore you should expect less than what you originally believed. That conclusion is not Scripture. That conclusion is a man-made agreement inserted between the true things where it would be difficult to detect. And you made that agreement in relationship, in conversation, with a specific person who is now gone, which means God considered that agreement significant enough to restructure your entire relational architecture to interrupt it. The removal felt like loss. It was surgery. The person was not the problem. The agreement was the problem. The pattern of thought you had rehearsed together, the mutual lowering of expectation dressed as mature faith, was the thing God was targeting. He could not easily reach the agreement while the relationship was intact, because every time the agreement surfaced for examination, the relationship reinforced it. The comfort of shared belief, even shared wrong belief, is one of the most powerful forces in human relational life. You were not going to dismantle a shared ceiling while you were standing under it with someone you trusted. So God removed the architecture, not to punish you, not to punish them. They were not a villain. They were a person God loved who was, in this specific dynamic, in this specific recurring conversation, producing a version of you that could not receive what God had already approved. So God removed the architecture. He gave you access to a ceiling you had stopped being able to see because you were both standing under it, calling it sky. This is the part that requires the most honesty. The question is not whether God removed someone. You already know he did. The question is what you have been doing with the space since, because that space was not given to you as a wound to manage indefinitely. It was given to you as an opening. The people God removes without explanation leave behind them a very specific kind of silence. Not the silence of abandonment, not the silence that means you are not worth staying for. The silence of a room that has been cleared deliberately and is waiting for something different to be built inside it. What you construct in that silence matters more than most people have told you. Some people fill it immediately. Another relationship, another voice, another person offering the same kind of warmth with the same kind of lid, and they step into it gratefully because the silence was too loud and the cycle continues. God removes again. Again, the removal is filed under loss. Again, the prayer remains unanswered. Again, the distance between what was promised and what is experienced grows by another year. Others sits in the silence long enough to hear something they could not hear before. Not a dramatic word, not a vision or an audible voice, something quieter than that. The sound of their own faith without someone else's ceiling resting on top of it. That sound is unfamiliar at first. It can feel like arrogance. It is not arrogance. It is what your faith actually sounds like when it has room. There is something you may have done in the silence that felt like healing but was closer to avoidance. You processed the loss. You journaled it or talked it through or prayed it into a posture of peace. And peace is real and peace is good, but peace about a relationship ending is not the same as understanding why the relationship ended. You can be completely healed of the hurt and still carry the agreement. The agreement does not live in the hurt. It lives in the thinking. It lives in the category you built over years of conversation with that person, the one that quietly sorts incoming possibilities into the ones that are for you and the ones that are probably not. That category did not disappear when they did. It is still organizing your expectations. It is still filtering your prayers before they leave your mouth. You are praying through a ceiling you do not know is there because you made peace with the person who helped you build it. And that felt like the work, and it was not all the work. The blessing that has been waiting for you has not been withheld. This is important. It has not been delayed for reasons outside your reach, hidden in some divine timeline you're not permitted to access. It has been waiting for the version of you that no longer needs the removed person's agreement to believe it is possible. That is a precise statement. The blessing is not held up by God's calendar. It is held up by an interior agreement you made, probably in the presence of someone who is no longer in your life that you have not yet fully renounced. Renouncing it is not complicated. It does not require a ceremony or a prayer line or a specific Sunday. It requires one moment of honest interior inventory in which you name specifically the thing you stopped believing was possible, and the approximate conversation in which you stop believing it, and you say clearly, with your actual voice or in writing where you can see the words, that agreement is not my agreement anymore. I did not choose limitation. I rehearsed it until it felt like faith, and I am done rehearsing it. That moment is available to you tonight, before you sleep. In the same quiet where the tracking thought surfaced. The same quiet is waiting for a different use. The people God removed were not your enemies. Some of them are people you still love. The removal was not a verdict on their character or your history together or the genuine good that existed in what you built. The removal was a very targeted statement about what that specific relationship was producing in the specific region of your faith that governs expectation. God does not narrate his surgical interventions. He does not send an explanation along with the wound. He removes and he waits. He watches whether you will examine the space or fill it. He watches whether the silence will produce inventory or avoidance. The opening does not stay open without limit. not because God closes it in judgment, but because you close it with the next agreement you enter, the next friendship that offers the same comfortable ceiling wearing a different face, the next version of the same conversation that produces the same lowering of what you are willing to believe is still available to you. You're at the opening right now. The person is gone. The reason is still unclear. The grief may still be present, and that grief is allowed to exist alongside everything else this is. None of it changes what the space is for. The prayer you have been praying for years does not need a new strategy. It does not need more consistency or more volume or a different theological framework. It needs you to stand in the specific space left by the removal, without the agreement that used to stand there next to you and believe, on your own, with no one confirming it, that what you asked for was never unreasonable, that God approved it before you asked, that it has been approved the entire time, that the only thing standing between you and the answer is one interior agreement you made with someone who is no longer in the room. The person is gone. You are still here. The agreement can stay or go. That part is yours. God removed the person to create the condition where that choice became possible. He has been patient about it. He is still waiting for you to see that the room he cleared is not empty. The room is ready. And so, finally, are you?